Have you ever wondered what happened to Dummy for Theology? Well, if you have, you're in good hands. We're going to talk about what has happened since October. So if you're looking for a podcast with all the answers about theology, it's going to help you better understand your faith, you've come to the wrong place. If you're looking for a show, though, it's going to help you ask questions, struggle with differing opinions from smart theologians, leave you completely clueless, just as I have been, then you have found the perfect show for you, my friends. This is a show designed to give you more questions than answers. I am Joshua Knoll. I'm just a dummy who loves God and theology and hopes to show my love for God by studying and thinking deeply about topics that people smarter than me have been thinking about for thousands of years now. Yeah, it's been a while since we've done the show. I think there's some pretty good reasons, and instead of going back to our season and not explaining it to you and just going back to logical fallacies, I want to break down what's happened, because I think what's happened to me and some of the questions I've been wrestling with will be good questions to leave you all to wrestle with as well. So, here we are. Since I last recorded, I had read and studied a lot for Theology Beer Camp last year in October. That changed a lot of my views, made me kind of question a lot of stuff already. Attended camp, more stuff made me question my views and all that kind of stuff. Then there was a shooting at my house before I made it back from camp. I was in the airport, actually. My wife and dog were both shot. That rocked my world. In a way, it changed everything, and I'm still questioning a lot, but the show is about questions. So I feel comfortable being here because I'm not going to provide you with any answer. Be like, oh, now I have this profound insight. Nope. But I do have questions, and I'm going to share them with you. Since then, I've read the Tao Te Ching over probably 4 times now. I read the Bible all the way through at least once a month, usually a little bit more than that. And I've done a lot of growing and struggling with myself, and I just kind of want to share where I'm at, basically. That's all this is. So I'm going to go through it kind of one step at a time a little bit. So we'll get to the big stuff that maybe all of you are here for a little bit later. First, I want to start with Camping with Kierkegaard. So that's a book that I read last year, written by Aaron Simmons, who, I immediately read this book and was like, I want to be Aaron Simmons. This guy's amazing. And the book really focuses on the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard, how Aaron's interpreting it through his own life and lens, and using like camping, hiking analogies to kind of break that down. One of the things Kierkegaard talks about is really thinking about and considering our finitude, which is appropriate given this is the season of Lent still right now. And he talks about like, what is worth your finitude? My limited time on this earth. And that's a good question. It kind of shook me because, like, as a Christian, a lot of times you're only thinking about the afterlife, and you're not thinking about, like, what do I do with the time here? And the question is, whether or not heaven exists, is what I'm doing with my time here actually worth my time? And Aaron Simmons kind of breaks down, like, how even though he's teaching all this philosophy, a lot of it didn't quite hit him. It didn't hit him when his kid asked him, like, hey, said he didn't want to be a professor because they never have time for their family. It didn't hit him when all these different things happened until he actually slowed down during COVID. And he realized what he was doing wasn't worth it. He was grinding, trying to make it up the ladder in the workplace. And you're like, but is it really worth my finitude? Thinking of that, already, I don't know, something was changing in me. Last year, my plan was to try to keep podcasting and also become a lawyer. So I was going to go to law school, do all this stuff. And then I'm listening to that, I'm like, yeah, but then I'm never home with my family. Is that worth my finitude? Which once my wife and dog both get shot, they're both alive now, that even more made me think, like, a lot of lawyers spend 60 plus hours in the workplace. Do I want to be away from my family that often for however long I have so that I can make money and that maybe one day we could go do stuff? Or do I want to live this moment right now like it's worth it? What is worth my finitude? So it's a tough question. So already starting, Soren Kierkegaard, rocking my world, Aaron Simmons making me go, oh, hey, maybe I need to reconsider things. For the record, now my plan is unsure. I'm really not sure what I want to do because I don't want to just be that kind of person who, like, every little thing that happens, I suddenly change my whole trajectory in life. But I also don't want to let this moment slip by without truly considering, what does this inform about me? What do I want my limited time to be about? So that part is tough. And that was earlier in the year. When it came closer to October, I started preparing for a panel I had at Theology Beer Camp, where I was talking to Dr. Ben Chica, about his work with playing as the other. So he does a lot of work with both Paul Tillich and Emmanuel Levinas, right? So I was studying a lot of Paul Tillich because that was the real focus. I also was going to have a co-host who does a podcast, Tillich Today. So Taylor Thomas, she's awesome. Shout out to you. So I read like 4 or 5 full books from Paul Tillich, trying to understand his philosophy before going into this, because I know video games. But I'm talking about Paul Tillich in video games. I wanted to know more about Paul Tillich so I could ask more informed questions. And I was reading him, he's talking about this whole idea of like God's agency being different than I ever really considered, right? Like instead of like maybe God controlling or stepping in and doing stuff or like creating, maybe the entire ground of being, the idea that we exist at all, the thing that allows us to exist is God. So he is the ground of being, not some other entity out there in relationship with us. It's kind of the way Paul Tillich, that's how I understand Paul Tillich. Remember, I am a dummy. And that was really intriguing to me. It's like, yeah, I owe our very existence to God. Like he is the reason for our existence. And when we lean into the ways of God, that's why things work better. And I'm like, okay, yeah, some of that was starting to click. I'm like, it kind of makes sense, but it also still kind of felt very atheist. Like God's not actually able to do anything. It's like, well, what's the point in saying I believe in God? Why not just kind of be like, hey, I exist and I think this is a good way of existing. So a lot of politics stuff didn't quite click, but it still challenged me to think about like, what is God's role in our life? And then I come across, my good friend, Dr. Tom Ord, and, thanks to my other friend, Josh Patterson, I was reading more John Cobb and kind of doing that stuff, going into Theology Beer Camp, already considering like, how much power does God have? What kind of agency does God have? Can God control? Does God love us? What are the ways that God interacts with us, basically, right? Like, is God all powerful and he can step in any time, just lets evil exist? Is God all powerful and lets us have choices? Is God maybe not all powerful? Maybe he's the most powerful, but not all powerful. And that's why evil exists. And we have to work with God, which is kind of what Tom Ord suggests. John Cobb has this whole idea of like, maybe God is like all these things are like, what is God? Right? Like this is what we're questioning. So Tom Ward says God maybe isn't all powerful, but is the most powerful, and his power is love. So he comes up with, instead of omnipotence, he is omnipotent, which is love power. John Cobb, when I'm reading him, he's like, yeah, God doesn't exist. God insists. In each moment, we choose to interact in a way that whether is worthy of the divine or not. And we can look back, just like when you look back and be like, was justice done or not? You can look back and be like, yeah, God was there. It's like when I chose to love someone in a moment, and I chose to be there for someone at their lowest point, I can look back and be like, God was there. God's a calling, rather than God just existing. He's an insistence. For me, again, that, like a lot, John Cobb, not Tom Ward, John Cobb's version also, I'm like, I feel like I just don't need the language of the divine or God at that point. Like, it's just atheism to me personally. Maybe I just don't understand it. And that never felt right, because I feel like I do have this open relationship with God. So Tom Ward's a little bit closer to me, but still that whole thing of like God not being all powerful, I was like, I don't know about that, because like a lot of my doctrine is built on this idea that God created everything ex nihilo, which, out of nothing. If God's not all powerful, how could he create all things? He must have all power to create all things. It's just kind of how I understand it, which is why salvation matters. So everything kind of builds on itself. So for me, if I'm kind of the atonement model of like kind of close to like Christus Victor, I guess, where I think God literally defeated hell and the grave, so that none of us have to ever experience eternal death or go to hell. That we all can be saved. And I think in the end, we all will be saved. So kind of like a Christian universalist, not regular universalism. That's a whole different thing. That's kind of where I'm at. But none of that works if God isn't all powerful, because how did Jesus have the power over hell and the grave unless he created all things? The reason hell exists, the reason the grave exists in the first place, was because God created all things and they had to exist, or they were part of the design. So for me, it all kind of builds on itself. And I can't quite make sense of that. So my pushback on Tom Ward that we've discussed before, we're going to discuss more on the Whole Church podcast, so check it out. My pushback is more like, I think we're talking about, rather than how much power God has, maybe we're discussing what type of God power power God has. He says omnipotence, love, is God's power. And I'm like, yeah, cool, I'm down with that. But I don't think that negates God having all power. God has all power that is love. And of course, there's limitations to what it means to be all powerful and all that stuff. And there's a long history of philosophers and theologians clarifying what we mean by that term, just like we clarify any term. And I'm really comfortable with that. And Aaron Simmons has helped me understand a lot more. He's way smarter than I. So check out his YouTube page. He's great. He's really good at helping you understand some of that kind of stuff. But I'm wrestling with this whole idea of like, who is God? What is God's agency? What is God's role in my life? All that kind of stuff. Reading through this, going to the Theology beer camp, hearing people talk about them. Man, these guys are smart. Sounds like they know what they're talking about. And then again, there's that shooting at my house, right? And all of a sudden, honestly, I get a little pissed off at different points. I'm like, but if God's the way I think he is, he's in a relationship with me, and he's there. He has all powerful. Why did my dog get shot in the face? Why did a bullet graze my wife's arm? Why did these things happen? Why would God allow that to happen? I couldn't make sense of it. And then going back through, my evangelicals would be like, well, it's because, people have choices. God has all power, but he lets us have choices. And I'm like, and he couldn't have just stopped that. Like, there's so many other instances where God just stepped in and did something. And then, sometimes they'll be like, well, you're blessed because it could have been a lot worse. I'm like, but it could have not happened at all. So all that kind of stuff just fell flat to me. Going back to Paul Tillich, God being the ground of existence, and so we're all grounded. So you mean like the stuff that happened there, the whole reason any of it exists is because its foundation is in God. So some part of God must be evil then, because what happened was evil. And if everything is in its existence is rooted in God, it's that I couldn't round that. For me, I couldn't round that sort of circle. I don't know. John Cobb's God is an insistent. He calls out so that we can choose to have God in that moment. So God just wasn't there then. Well, that's not very comforting, because I kind of actually want to believe that God was with my wife, even through the worst times, even when it seems like God wasn't there. That didn't sit well with me. Tom Ord's like God's not all powerful, so he couldn't have done anything. We could choose to cooperate with God, and then he wouldn't. It's like, well, was there no one in the area that could have chosen to cooperate with God? My dog just can't cooperate with God enough for that not to happen. Like my wife, at that point, what's even the point of that, God? For me personally, that's the emotions I was going through. That's what I was feeling at that time. So it all kind of shook me up. But I know I believe in God. I just wasn't sure how or to make sense of it. So I kept going through, right? I go back to weirdly enough, one of the big moments for me was doing a podcast on systematic ecology. I've been reading Swamp Thing. And specifically, there was a crossover comic event of Swamp Thing and Poison Ivy. And I read it, and it talks about some of this process theology that I never quite was on board with. I'm still not quite on board with, but some stuff really makes sense from it, and I love, and I hold on to what I like, and I don't hold on to everything. I'm a dummy. I can do that. I have to pick a camp. But in this comic book, Swamp Thing, he talks about how we're all in a process of becoming, which is classic line from process theologians, especially if you listen to podcasts with Josh Patterson. Shout out Jay Patty. Love you, man. And the story that's told in that Swamp Thing and Poison Ivy comic is this girl dies alone in a bench. And when we do this podcast, we wrestle with these ideas of if John Cobb's right, God wasn't there in that moment. He was an insistence. And there, when she died alone on that bench, God was not present. Because no one actualized the divine right there. And that's a call to us to say, hey, we need to do better to actualize the divine. The comic kind of pointed out that there's rich white guys sitting up in these buildings up above in their apartments while this girl died alone on a bench, homeless, cold. Swamp Thing talks about how we're all in a process of death isn't the end, that there's still more, that we become more. And I don't know, something about that was encouraging, that death was not the end of this girl's story. The shooting wasn't the end of my family's story. If it had been worse, it still would not have been the end of the story. There's more. And that's where some of John Caputo stuff has helped. It kind of makes sense of things. What helped actually more, Jonathan Foster has his book, Indigo, The Color of Grief. And he talks about the loss of his daughter. And there's a lot of theopoetics. So what's cool about Jack Caputo at theopoetics is it kind of has this like God maybe. It's like, I'm not sure, but maybe. And then I found a lot of comfort in that. Not having certainty gave me more comfort than any of the answers people were trying to throw my way. It's just this idea of like, yeah, God was there. In Jonathan Foster's book, he talks about a story he heard of these Jewish people being hung. And God was there dying with those boys. And he read that and he thought about it and it sat with him. And then later, when his daughter was tragically lost her life, he thought God was with her in that truck. And I don't have to make sense of why God was there, why God didn't do anything, any of that. It was just, wow, that is comforting. And for me to look back and go, yeah, it's all terrible. None of it should have happened. But when my dog was screaming, bleeding everywhere, no one thought he was going to live. When my wife was scared for her life, holding him in our kitchen, God was there in that kitchen. Why that happened, I don't know. But I know God was there. So God, maybe, that gave me a lot of comfort. That's something I really hold on, something I'm still holding on to. Moving on a little bit, other terrible things happened in the world. Donald Trump got elected as president in last year. So I've also, just because of the groups I'm in, been reading a lot more about Bonhoeffer. So having Bonhoeffer in my mind, Donald Trump being elected, seeing all the things that's happening in American politics, rose more questions up for me. You know, I'm supposed to be the church unity guy. I'm looking at this going, how could I say someone's a Christian who supports a man who, by any normal colloquial use of the term, he raped a woman, right? And if you want to be technical, it was sexual assault, not rape. Like, how can you support that man? A man who openly hates the immigrants, the others, those who are lost, scared, who are like me and my wife that day. That's their normal life. And he just hates them. And people who call themselves Christians are supporting that man. I'm like, how? For me, church unity at that point, I'm like, I kind of want to throw it out. Kind of like, screw this guy, screw this. But I actually realized there's a deeper calling there. That church unity is about actually being the church, the ecclesia. So we're getting into ecclesiology here. We can't have church unity unless we're in Christ. Supporting that kind of behavior, supporting that kind of man. You're not in Christ if you support that. And that's something I've been holding on to. And that makes me more passionate about church unity because I'm like, we got to go back and define what it means to be the church, what it means to be in Christ, as Corinthians talks about, right? You know, I don't like to talk about myself. I like to say I'm just a dummy. But you guys know, I have a degree in Bible. I'm getting a master's in Bible. I'm also getting a master's in legal studies. Like I'm not uneducated. I'm a dummy, but I'm not uneducated. And I see what's happening. I'm like, no, that's not what the Bible's talking about. Nothing that's happening here is what the Bible calls Christians to be. And it breaks my heart to see the church stray so far from being the church. And, you know, I've been wrestling with that. Is Trump worse than Hitler? Because I think there's a chance Hitler believed some of the stuff that he said. I don't think Donald Trump even believed a lot of the stuff that he said. Hitler got some of his stuff from, unfortunately, Martin Luther. You know, I'm a Lutheran now, and I'm like, I have to wrestle with the fact that Martin Luther said some really terrible anti-Semitic stuff. That's where Hitler got some of his stuff, you know. But that's hard. Donald Trump, though, I don't know where he gets his stuff, other than just hate, evil, corruption. I don't know. They're probably just as bad as one another. But I'm living with Trump, so it's more in my face, so it feels worse than anything I've ever read. You know, I know Hitler's actions were worse because he had more power. But I think if Trump had that same amount of power, I personally believe he would do worse things than Hitler. And that scares me because he's getting that power slowly, but he's getting there. Seeing this hypocrisy in the church, seeing how scary the world is, what does it mean to have church? Like, and then Bonhoeffer's call, when you read through his life and how he might have been part of an assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler, and then was like, actually, no, I do believe in nonviolence. Like, my principles are actually more important than any utilitarian action. You know, I've always been against utilitarianism. I still am. I don't think the ends ever justify the means. I'm looking at this going, oh man, there's something more important than stopping Donald Trump. And it's our principles. No action is going to stop him. I hate to tell people this because I hear a lot of people, even in my own circles, who are like, I'm not sure, could violence be the answer? Like they're hinting around this thing. And I'm like, no, stop that. Like, here's the deal. You want to know what killing Donald Trump would do? By the way, I am against it. I am saying nonviolence. Attacking Donald Trump is going to create more Donald Trumps. It's going to make him look like a martyr. It's going to validate all these people. Like, oh, see, we were right. The other side is evil. Violence will make things worse, not better. And that's why I hate utilitarians, because there's this arrogance of like, you think you know all the answers. What will happen if you kill Donald Trump? You think you know. I don't know. I'm pretty sure things would be worse. I could be wrong. But what if I'm right? What if it does make things worse? And like that's the thing. Everyone who does this utilitarian thing, they're just so arrogant. And I don't like to attack other people, but like that's why I call myself a dummy on the show. Is like I don't want to fall into that trap of ever thinking that I'm so smart that I know what the outcome will be. If you have the right theology, here's what will happen in your life. I don't know. I was like, if you vote for this man, here's what will happen. Oh, I don't know. What I know is in each moment, we are given the opportunity, and I would say the responsibility to do what is right. Violence is not right. Lying is not right. Supporting Donald Trump is not right. Does not matter what you think the end outcome will be. You do the right thing in each moment. That's why philosophy is important to me, because that's a philosophical argument, is utilitarianism, and like all this stuff. And I'm like, no, like that stuff, debunk it. Like that does not belong in a Christian's heart or mind. It does not belong in any ethical person's mind or heart, in my opinion. There's too much arrogance. And too much evil has been done in the name of utilitarianism. Eugenics happened in the name of utilitarianism. Come on, guys. The Crusades happened in the name of utilitarianism. Because everyone thinks that they have the answer. They know what the outcome will be. Like, no, you don't. You are not God. You are not the smartest person in the room. We are all just dummies. Kind of the point of the show. Sorry, that stuff infuriates me. But also, I've been studying metaphysics. Just moving on a little bit. I get to Immanuel Kant, and that's kind of where some of this stuff comes from. It's like I don't really believe in time in the way a lot of other people do. So this is where philosophy is important. What I know for sure is that the moment I'm in exists. What I don't know for sure is that the future exists. All time might end right after this sentence. There's no way for me to know. The past, I'm pretty sure exists. I have memories of it. There's all kinds of ways to explain why we think we have memories of things. What I know for sure is that the present moment exists. So in this present moment, I will do the right thing to the best of my abilities. And I will choose love and relationship. That's where Alfred Whitehead's different version of metaphysics helped me a lot too. So I got onto him thanks to Tripp Fuller and my friend Josh Patterson, all them. Whitehead's basic metaphysical philosophy kind of thing is like nothing exists on its own. Everything exists in relationship. You see this more in Emmanuel Levinas as well. So Alfred Whitehead and Levinas have been like my pillars for developing some of my thoughts these days. And I'm really going through a lot of change, thinking of what I think it means to exist for myself, God, each other, anything. And I think it does come down to this idea of like we only exist in relationship. And I'll go back to a C.S. Lewis quote that really kind of, for me, solidifies this. It's just the idea of like C.S. Lewis talks about how in friendship, the more of us, there's more. So if you have friend A, friend B, friend C, you're all a friend group. Friend B dies. Friend A doesn't just lose friend B, but there's some part of friend C that only came out when friend B was around that he also loses that. I experienced that with my brother when my papa died. That was his best friend. That was his best friend. So I didn't just lose my papa, but I saw like all these parts of my brother that only came around when my papa was there. They're gone now. And like, it's because we exist in relationship. Part of who my brother was only existed when my papa was around. Who I am is defined by relationship. Part of who I am is because of my dog. My dog brings out a lot of me. My wife brings out a lot of me. My best friends, when I go camping, I feel like the most me I am, not just because I'm in nature and connected, but like a lot of times your phones are laid aside and you're just there with your closest people in relationship and connection. And like those relationships are what define you. even down to the smallest particles, like all the cells that you see here on the screen if you're on YouTube, or that are me. If I look in the mirror, they're all different than they were like 10 years ago or something, right? Like I'm constantly renewing. I don't have the same pieces that make me up aren't the same pieces that I was with some of these memories I think I have, right? Gets weird when you get into the time stuff, right? but let's assume the past exists for now so that we can have this conversation and not sound like lunacy. If that's true, what makes me me isn't my pieces. You got to question your soul when you look into metaphysics, and you're like, okay, so here's what I think my soul is. And all of a sudden you see, well, if your brain's affected in this way, everything you said about your soul just then changed. And your soul is like, oh, if you love people and you do all this, well, there are mental disorders that cause you to suddenly be an angry person. People have become murderers because they lost their mind. People, like, if someone's saved and they get dementia, they forget that they ever accepted Jesus and they go back to their old ways. Like, what do you think of their soul then? Physical bits, all these little pieces are interconnected. And it's like, it doesn't make sense if you hold to this, like, everything exists because of the pieces argument. You have to hold more to, like, what Wyatt talks about with, like, is the relationships of one cell to another. That's the relationship. One atom to another is what defines the molecule, right? All the cells that I am, the relationship to one another makes up my body. My relationships to the people around me make up who I am. I think God is also defined by his relationship. God doesn't just exist in a vacuum on his own. He's defined by his relationship with each of us. Is he loving us? Is he there for us? Is he our ground of being? Is he in an open relationship with us? Is he controlling us? Who God is defined by his relationship to each of us, to everything he created, to himself, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Nothing exists without relationship, which is also part of why I don't believe in time. When I look at Einstein stuff, what I'm interpreting is time doesn't exist unless it's in relationship to space. There's something called space-time, not something called time. There's not something called space. There is something called space-time. We all exist in relationship. Everything exists in relationship. Which in a way goes back to that finitude thing. And man, doesn't it make it scary when you realize anyone around you. I've had a friend who was my age when he died of a heart attack. In the season of Lent, I'm thinking a lot about that. I'm like, oh, at any moment, people closest to me could just fall over, and I don't just lose them. I lose part of me because I'm defined by my relationships. I lose part of my other friends because they're defined by their relationships. Which also makes it really important, the relationships you choose to hold on to and what you don't. Do I choose to prioritize these camping trips? Do I choose to prioritize my wife, or do I spend 60 hours in a law firm? And defined by my relationships. My relationships end up being defined by my choices. What's worthy of my finitude sits at the back of all of this for me. And then I mentioned I've been rereading the Tao Te Ching. I've been more fully embracing the term of a Taoist Christian. I believe Taoism really informs my Christianity and helps a lot of like how I think about the world. Some people call it other religions. Some people call it a philosophy. For me, I don't care. I really don't care what you call it. The teaching of Taoism are about finding the way and just connecting, knowing what is right. I don't need to know all the answers, but I can just be. I don't need to know, was God the ground of the being of the shooter at my house? I don't need to know, was God, just could not be there because no one chose the calling, the insistence of God in the moment of the shooting outside my house. I don't even know any of that. What I need to know is my wife was holding my dog in the kitchen and God was there. To me, that simplicity, when you read the Tao Te Ching, that's the way. That's the Tao. Is that simple, like, hey, you're just going to know what's right. I know what happened was wrong. I know that Donald Trump is wrong. You don't necessarily need to know all the reasons. You can see this man, see him talk, feel, and like something in you knows that is wrong. And that's what Taoism is about. It's about simplicity. And I think we need a more simple faith sometimes. C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity. Maybe I should write Simple Christianity. There's something about the simplicity that we lose. Taoism talks a lot about having an empty mind. You crowd your head with all these thoughts of like, oh, is God the ground of being? Is God this? Is God that? And like, it's fun to think about. I enjoy it. I'm going to keep doing the show and keep asking those questions. But if I crowd my mind with all that, I'm filled with anxiety. I can't find comfort. And that's what I experienced. But if I empty my mind and just, God was there, I can find that comfort. The Tao Te Ching also talks about being water. We're not in competition with anyone, but we can benefit all. Something about that's just right. I think that's the heart of Christ. Benefit all. See, the Bible talks about like the best of your abilities. Be at peace with all men. Be water. Tao Te Ching. Like it's the same thing to me. Benefit all. Be in conflict with none. I don't need answers. I need to learn to be. I need to learn to find a way to be present. And what I need is the I am. The Bible talks about God as the I am, as in I am present. That's who God is. That's what the Tao is. And that's what I need in my life. That's what makes sense of all this to me. It's going back to just simplicity. And I find that in the Tao Te Ching. And it helps me read the Bible better and just go, hey, I don't have to pick everything apart. It's fun. And sometimes I'm going to because I enjoy it. But sometimes I'm just going to read. Shout out to my good friend who does the Underground Church Bible After Hours show on the same network as the Podcast Network. I don't need that story. I could read the story of Jesus leaving the 99 for the one. I can realize, hey, I was that one for a moment, right? Like, man, I was in an airport. I was lost. I was hurt. I had a friend, Kristen, who was there for me. Walked me through the airport. I have no idea how I got where I was. When I was in that moment, God was there with Kristen, walking me through the airport. And all my friends called me and was there for us. I had people who actually sent us money to help us with the dog's, vet bills, which were crazy. God was there. Those things are good. What happened was bad. Simplicity. There's power in simplicity. God is in simplicity. I think we need to more embrace that simple faith that comes with some of God's promises. I read that God has a promise not to destroy us all with that rainbow. Don't need to pick it apart. I can do that sometime. I can do an exegesis and then preach a great sermon or something, and maybe I should. But I also sometimes need to just read the stories of the Bible and let them be. Just let them be. What they are to me in that moment is okay, whatever it is. All right, so going through practical theology. Does any of this matter? I think so. Practically, we look at all this abstract stuff that's usually, you guys hear me rant, you're like, wait, how are you going to make that make sense? Like, how is that applicable to your life? And I'm like, well, yeah, usually it sounds like a bunch of philosophical mumbo jumbo. Does time real? Is God the ground of our being, or is he an open relationship with you? You're like, oh, practically it does matter. Because in that moment, when I'm trying to process what happened to my family, I want to know if God's there. In that moment, I could look to the future, see what could happen, what could have happened to my dad, I could think about that, or I could be in the moment, present with the great I am. Yeah, practically, it matters. All of this matters. Whether time exists matters. It informs my choices in the present. Instead of looking to utilitarian with the arrogance that I think I know what's going to happen, I can say, in this moment, I need to be with my family. In this moment, I need to speak out against Donald Trump. Why? Because that's what's right. Simple. And it matters. Who insisted the divine presence? If I think any part of what John Cobb says is right, or Jack Cobb, whatever, like Jack Caputo, I have to ask that question of who did insist the divine's presence? Whether or not I agree with him, I think that's an important question to ask. Where do I see God? If he was an insistence, I don't think that's true, but let me assume it is, and ask that question, wrestle with it. My friend who walked me through the airport, she was there. My friends who were there when I was hurt, God was in that insistent moment. The people who said nothing to me, and then after I spoke out against Donald Trump's like, oh, I'm concerned for your spirit and your well-being. God's not in that. That's not the insistence of God. That's the insistence that you think you're right. That's the insistence of arrogance, pride. Being there for someone when they're hurt, that's the insistence of the divine. Whether or not I think that's true, I think thinking about the insistence of God and what it looks like matters. I've been also wrestling with I kind of didn't let go of biblical inerrancy. I stopped using the term because I think how I view the Bible isn't exactly what some of your furthest conservative people like Al Mohler and them would think of it. And all the people who hear me say that I think I hold to a form of biblical inerrancy think I mean that it's all literally true, which isn't what I mean. So I had to stop using that term. And now I'm wrestling with can some parts of the Bible be wrong? And what do I do with that? If we're going to go with who is God, the Bible gives us some clear answers. But if I'm not sure about biblical inerrancy, those answers become a lot less clear. There's more to wrestle with. And I think the Bible has a lot of questioning of itself, going back and forth, a lot of debate within the different biblical texts, push and pull, yin and yang. And if that's true, I don't think the Bible can give us some clear answers on any of this. So what comfort does it provide? Like, I think the Bible's still important. It informs how we continue to have these conversations, not giving us solid answers for us to be prideful and think we know we're right, but rather questions to humble us, for us to wrestle with and think, okay, well, what does this say? What do I believe? Have conversations with the author and what the Bible's saying and build on that. It's harder work, but the easy way is not always the right way. But I'm not saying that I know biblical inerrancy is incorrect. It's just, where I am now. That's the thing I'm wrestling with. This is something about me, guys. Chill. Historical theology, we see the mystics kind of wrestle with a lot of this stuff, right? We see Origen talks about, maybe we do all make it to heaven. And what does that mean? What did God actually do there on the cross? All this stuff plays a part of what we think of when we think of like who God is. What's his relationship to us? What is time? All of these things matter. They play together. We see it throughout the history of the church. We see it throughout the Bible. None of it's easy to wrestle with. And that's where I think these Taoist principles of simplicity, of just, what's right, do it. God is there. Feel him. He is the I am present with you. Be with him. As always, we like to end the show with 3 takeaway questions. Not answers, but questions, not takeaway actions. Who wants that? So I have 3 questions for you all today. Number 1, how Taoist can I be still holding on to my Christian identity? I do think there are some things in Taoism I'm like, that's not quite right. Luckily, the Taoist religion does not require you to hold its text as inerrant. There's a lot of flexibility. So I think, I hold to what I believe is right within my Christian faith first. Anything that conflicts with that, I let go of. But anything that helps me better understand that, helps better hold on to the I am with simplicity, the way. That's what I want to. But I don't have any clear answers. But I think it's important for us all to ask like these kind of questions. So that's something I'm asking myself. How Taoist can I be and still hold on to my Christian identity? Number 2, how do I differentiate certainty from faith in practice? What does it mean to have faith in God, that God is there, and to be certain that I know who God is and know all this stuff about God and know, what is the difference of certainty and faith? Practically, what are the difference of those two things? That's something I think we can all wrestle with. Number 3, I think it is important whether or not we believe Jack Caputo's idea of God. We need to think of this like, am I actualizing the divine in my daily life? And in how I am and in how I process trauma. Like I have a lot to process right now. I'm still asking these questions. I'm still wrestling. Is the way that I'm wrestling honoring to God? Am I actualizing the divine in that or not? That's something I have to wrestle with. But I think we all need to wrestle with. Like, are you actualizing the divine in your daily life, and how you're asking the questions you have to wrestle with, in how you're interacting with God and others? Are you actualizing the divine or not? So again, here's our 3 questions. How Taoist can I be and still hold on to my Christian identity? How do I differentiate certainty from faith and practice? And am I actualizing the divine in my daily life? Well, guys, I hope you're all just as confused as I am. If so, I'm sorry. And I hope you're inspired to study these great theologians and thinkers like Jack Caputo, Immanuel Kant, Kierkegaard, Levinas, all the philosophers too. I hope you're encouraged to study them more deeply on this topic going forward in your own faith journeys. Again, thank you all so much for joining this dummy on my journey to learn more about God and to love him better. I hope this has encouraged you to worship God in your own thinking. And of course, to keep on struggling. Till next time.